Good day and talofa, everyone. Welcome to another webinar made possible by the American Samoa Alliance Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Today's webinar is titled Safety Planning for Domestic Violence Victims. Again, safety planning for domestic violence victims. And today's webinar is being hosted live today, December 16th, the year 2020 at 11 a.m. local time or American Samoa time. Today's webinar is also being co-facilitated by myself, Judy Matatia, the program specialist for the American Samoa Alliance Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. And joining us as well is Jennifer Tafiono, the executive director of the Alliance. Would you like to say hello, Jennifer?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, Judy.
So as we move into the, as you can tell, our webinar for today is titled Safety Planning for Domestic Violence Victims. So as we move straight into today's webinar. So as advocates, it's important to identify various ways to help victims reach out for assistance. And safety plans provide tips on coping with emotions, possible steps for legal actions, how to share with your family about what's happening in your relationship. So the purpose of this webinar is to strengthen victim advocacy for domestic violence through safety planning. We will talk and hopefully we will be able to have throughout the discussion about, discuss about advocacy and a tool used during advocacy, which is safety planning. And that's applying a cultural lens to safety planning so that to strengthen and increase resiliency for victims of violence. So hopefully at the end of this webinar, you'll know how to create a safety plan and find resources that will help victims of domestic violence. Did you want to add on anything else to that, Jennifer?
I think that definitely we just want to make sure at the end of the webinar that people recognize the purpose, and this is going to be stated throughout the webinar, that it really is to ensure the safety of the victim in traumatic times.
Sure. All right. Okay, so before we move on, today's webinar is an hour and a half, which is 90 minutes. And we just wanted to make a note that for the public chat function that's been turned off throughout this webinar, typing in your into the chat box will connect you directly with us. And so throughout the webinar, we're going to be asking some questions. So please type in your comments, your questions, or anything you want to share, you wish to share with us today, and Jennifer will be able to read them out. This is how you'll be able to ask your questions through the chat box, if you don't mind. Please ensure that your computer volumes is turned up. You can adjust the volume by using the bar above the video button. And for more information about domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual assault, please visit our website at asalliance.co or our Facebook page at the American Samoa Alliance Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, or you can even call our office 684-699-0272 and ask for any one of us, and we'll be able to have that discussion with you about violence. Okay. All right, so in order to assure that today's discussion will be on, today's discussion will be smooth sailing throughout the webinar. We just wanted to make sure that we have some of these house rules, and which are agreements made within this group, our group, that are shared between us, the Alliance, and you as the participant of this webinar. It also provides us as an agreement of how we will interact and foster shared accountability through this learning process. So the first one, respect. That's always a very important one. It's really important that we respect each other. We may not agree on what we have to share. Everyone has a different opinion, but it's very important to remember to please respect each other's sharing or each other's opinion. Contribute to the discussion or being present if you can, if you're able to, and let everybody participate, making sure that everyone's voice is heard. Very important to listen. This means to hear and pay attention with our ears, our hearts, searching the meaning of the speaker's discussion or whatever it is that whoever or the facilitators, aside from the facilitators, whatever everyone has to share with us. Attack the problem. We attack the problem and not the person. Let's make sure we're part of the solution. Very important, confidentiality means we create a safe space. Information shared here that is personal or may identify someone, we agree that we won't share without consent. We can't be sharing any of this information without each other's consent. Time conscious, we're going to be very mindful of our time and honor the time we have in this session, which is 90 minutes. One important one is stay mentally and physically present. It's very important that we are within our wellness. Nobody knows you better than yourself. So if throughout this discussion, anything you hear that is being said might be of trigger to you or put you in an uncomfortable situation, please make sure that you take care of yourself. Let's prioritize ourselves. If need be that you step away, take a break, get some fresh air, then so be it. Please do so, and please take care of yourself throughout this discussion. Last but not the least, mute our phones. Please mute our phones to minimize distractions and disruptions from ourselves and our phones. Yeah. So was there anything else you wanted to add on, Jennifer, to the house rules before we move on?
No, I think you've pretty much hit every one that I could think of. And then maybe what we can do is if anybody else wants to add any other agreements, they can in the chat box, and then we can include those as well.
Yeah, sure. So as Jennifer was saying, if there's anyone that thinks that there's something important that we're missing here from our house rules, please, by all means, go ahead and type it in our chat box, and we can read it out as we move on throughout as we begin our discussion for today. Okay. All right, so we're going to have Jennifer share with us what we're going to be learning today.
So we recognize those who help victims of domestic violence are important individuals. They are, we recognize that as advocates, or even those that are not considered advocates, but somebody that might have a friend that they're helping, they really need to have the tools to help survivors through times of crisis. As advocates, we become fierce guardians as we navigate victims from traumatic experiences to building resiliency and strengthening healing process after violence. So this webinar is focused on strengthening the toolbox for advocates or anybody else that doesn't consider themselves an advocate, but a friend or a sister or a sibling, ensuring that they have the tools to understand why safety planning is essential. We're going through the webinar, we're going to unpack victim-defined advocacy. We'll define safety planning. And we'll talk about how important it is to use a cultural approach to safety planning for victims in American Samoa. And we'll also provide resources on how to develop a safety plan, as well as resources for safety planning tools during this webinar.
Okay, all right. So looks like we've got a full, we've got a packed discussion ahead of us. And this is all good stuff, especially when it's, we're now during the holiday season. In case anyone out there is wondering, well, why is safety planning important right now? You know, I'm thinking of the holiday season, and with everything we've been through throughout the year with COVID and everything, people being stuck at home, people being isolated at home, people being away from being laid off, people not having work because of the things that have happened. Yeah, and so therefore there's a lot of stress that comes on to everyone. So there are also other things that come that are conceived out of stress, and violence never seemed to fail to be one of those things that come out of when we're stressed. So it's good to have a plan when things out of the ordinary happen. Okay.
And it's really another part that we talked about as well as data states that, you know, during holiday seasons, there's not an influx of calls during Christmas,
Mhm.
but there's an influx of calls when it comes to Thanksgiving or New Year's. But I think the reason why there's not an influx of calls is because these things are happening to victims, but they don't have a safety plan, or they don't know how, they're afraid to connect with service providers. And so having these safety plans are really essential
Yeah.
during these holiday seasons. So you bring up a good point.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on with our next slide. Okay, so this is our first question. This is going to be our first question for today's workshop or today's discussion. And that question is, what does safety planning look like to you? What does safety planning look like to you? So if you're listening in, and whatever safety planning looks like to you, because it's different with everyone, and so please type that into the chat box, and Jennifer will be able to share with us some of those comments or some of the sharings that some of us are going to be sharing. Some of you are going to be typing in today to include. So please don't be shy and share with us what you think safety planning is. We'll give everyone a minute.
I have a couple that I've already written in.
Okay, let's hear them. Let's hear them.
One says, using my knowledge about domestic violence and counseling the victim what to do.
And counseling the victim on what to do?
Using
their
my knowledge.
Their knowledge as an advocate, right?
And counseling the victim on what to do.
On what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You want me to?
Yeah, can you read that again? Can you read that again?
Yeah, so they're saying what safety planning looks like to them. It's using their knowledge about domestic violence, what they know, and then them counseling the victim what to do. And so for this particular, yes, it is. You are using your experience, you're using your knowledge. But the thing that I want to make sure that the counseling the victim on what to do is you're counseling based on what safety planning can do. We always want to remember that when we're counseling, we're asking the victim, what does safety planning look like for them? And I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more about victim-defined advocacy, but it's really important. Yes, use this whole idea of this webinar is to definitely strengthen your toolbox, give you an additional tool to use with victims. But we also want to make sure that when you're working with them, that it's not always about what you know and what your experience is about. It's using your knowledge and your experience, but allowing that victim to still make that choice.
And the safety plan, and I'm thinking for safety planning, your safety planning should be, it's very important because some of us have a tendency to just, and because we want to help this person so much that we just pour everything that we know, our knowledge onto this person, like, this is what you need to do, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we forget to listen. We forget to listen to the victim. So you don't need to share. So I'm thinking, I don't need, as an advocate, I probably don't necessarily need to share everything I know, because I would just have to share according to what the victim's situation is, right? Like, correct. Because I'm thinking for a safety plan, like we're saying, safety planning is different for everyone. So everyone's situation is different. So we should plan according to, I'm thinking there cannot be a plan without the victim's input or without the victim's sharing the story and everything, right? Is there somebody else? Do we have another?
Well, one of the respondents wrote, because all situations are different, so we need to make sure that the plan caters to how it could help the victim. So that was in response to what you said. So yes, so that's good. But there is another question, if we have time. So it's teaching victims what safety looks like with an abuser.
What safety, teaching victim what safety looks like.
So I want, yeah, definitely we want to make sure that we're teaching them what safety looks like with an abuser, but there's also, we also need to let the participants know that there are so many ways to protect yourself, that there are different types of safety plans. You have a safety plan on what to do when you go to court. You have a safety plan on what to do with social media. You have a safety plan for your children. You know, so domestic violence definitely is very, there's so many components to it because it's psychological. And so it's really important that we recognize one safety plan is not an answer to everything. There are so many different safety plans that you can do.
Yeah, and I always like to say that nobody knows the situation better, or nobody knows the situation best. And when I say situation, I mean the abuse, the violence that's going on. Nobody knows that better than the victim.
Correct.
The victim knows where they're going to be violated, when it's going to happen to them, why,
how often,
or how, you know, that's so yeah. And so that's why I'm thinking that the victim should be like the mastermind in the safety planning. Like the victim should be, you're creating a safety plan off of, feeding off of what the information that you're getting from the victim.
Yeah, I would definitely say that the victim has to have ownership.
Yeah.
So they need to, because when you have ownership of the safety plan, then it definitely reflects on what your needs are, not what somebody else thinks that you should have. But the ownership is that these are your decisions. This is your experience. This is your knowledge. This is, you know, when your abuser attacks you, when your abuser gets upset. So the whole purpose of the safety plan is to ensure safety.
And it's just like teaching the child how to dial 911, right? I mean, when something happens at home, or if you, the mother, should fall sick, and your child knows how to, your 3 or 4-year-old child knows how to dial 911, you know, so that you can get help. Those kind of preparations, right?
There is one more comment, and it has something to do with what you just said. So I just want to make sure if I can put this one in. So it says, what to do when something happens, where do I go, and who do I call? So having access to know, calling 911, calling DHSS, calling DOH, you know, having those crisis numbers there available. And knowing
Can you read that comment out again, Jennifer? Sorry.
It says, what to do when something happens, where do I go, and who do I call? That's what safety planning looks like for this.
Absolutely. That's totally right. Safety planning should include phone numbers, people's names, departments, right? You know, safety planning should include like numbers like DPS 633-1111, DHS 633, whatever, you know, that kind of stuff, or people's names as well. That's totally right. So thank you for everyone sharing and everyone's answer to question number 1. What does safety planning look like to all of you? And obviously different and correct. So everyone has a, it's good to know that a lot of us out there do know what safety planning is. We're not in the dark about what safety planning is. And some of us have some really good ideas on what safety planning is. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, why safety planning is essential. We want to, why safety planning, we want to discuss why safety planning is important. So it's important to note the goal of advocacy is to increase victim and child safety, which is the same goal for victims who decide to stay, and those who want to leave or who have no contact with their abuser. Safety is also a space where safety planning is also a space where victims are free from the violence and control of their partners, with the goal of being able to meet the basic human needs. It also requires lessening the power and control held by by many abusers, such as like isolation, economic abuse, emotional abuse, coercion, threats using children, or intimidation. Um, Advocates also, the role of advocates also with victims include safety planning to reduce the violence and control of a violent partner, and methods to stop harm to the victims, which could include the victims could be partners, parents, children, and so forth. Was there anything else you wanted to add on, Jennifer?
No, I think that's perfect.
Okay. Give me a few seconds here. Okay. All right. And so we're moving on to the next slide. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Okay. So a successful safety plan. So you might be asking, what's a successful safety plan? So statistics show that it takes at least 7 times for a victim to leave or to get out of an abusive relationship. And a successful plan is defined by the victim, like we were talking about earlier. And as advocates, we ask the victims to describe, what does safety look like for them or for you? This is us, this is the advocates asking the victim. So some victims may have a hard time verbalizing safety. So we can also ask, what would make things better? Or what would make things worse for the victim? And any children, if children are involved. For those who have filed charges, we can ask, what does justice look like for you or for them, so that we can help victims define success. And as victim advocates, we must remember that the victim defines what they want, just like what we were discussing earlier, what they want. For a victim in contact, the definition of success may not be decreasing the level of violence or the violence going down, but another concern. A victim who stays in contact may say things are better because the partner no longer hits her or him or their children. They've stopped spending the paycheck or alcohol or hanging out with their friends. Behavioral changes that the victim values and prioritizes as necessary for the relationship rather than leaving. So victim advocate success is defined that no one is hurt or controlled by a partner, and no child is injured or traumatized by violence in that setting or within that family. Yeah. So was there anything else you wanted to add on, Jennifer, to that?
Yeah,
About successful safety planning?
I definitely did. I wanted to ask, well, one, I wanted to ask you, like, how would you say how would you translate these questions in Samoan if you were an advocate, a Samoan advocate asking these kind of questions? And then the second thing I wanted to say was that, oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Well, can you translate those for me?
Which one? Like the questions like
what does justice, what does safety look like for you?
Okay, so if we're saying what does safety look like to you, we're asking them like whape'i fōlingo saunga le mu mo oe, yati oe. Whawhiana saunga le mu. Whawhiana mawe oe saunga le mu. How would you be able to be safe? So safety, safe, the translation of that term would be saunga le mu. Can you hear me, or am I having problems with my?
No, we can hear you. You're fine.
Okay. So yeah.
And the other one was, what does justice look like?
Yes, what does justice look like? Whape'i fōlinga o le anga tonuino o sa wanga yati oe. Whape'i fōlinga o le ole alu ese mai sa wanga fape ifon, moving away from violence, because
Okay.
justice, like we understand, is different with everyone, and not necessarily having to send someone to prison for some. Justice can be different with everyone. Like I was saying earlier, that justice can be just the decreasing of the level of violence, or just the perpetrator or the abuser stop with the drinking or hanging out with the friends. That can be
Yeah.
just to some victims, right? So if I
Yeah.
ole alo ese mai le alu ese mai sa wanga fa pe I falling ole nofo le ai nofo sa oloto mai sa wanga. Yeah, so that can be the translation for some of this stuff.
Well, and the other thing I just wanted to make sure, and it's really important that those two questions, that we carry this through this webinar, because the other thing that's really important when we read the newspaper, our Samoa News, and we see those instances where men are arrested for domestic violence, for horrendous crimes of beating their women, dragging them, a lot of times you'll find that that woman has gone to court and asked for the forgiveness and asked for that man to come back with them to be released, because a lot of times they find the economic security, there's financial hardship. So, it's this definitely understanding that safety planning doesn't always rely on leaving a situation. Safety planning for a victim can be very different. As we stated earlier, it can be just making sure that he doesn't drink so much and isn't spending their money, then putting them in, or that he's not as angry and he has better way of resolving anger, so that this way there's not an abusive attack.
Yes.
So that was just what I wanted to add. Thank you, Judy.
Okay.
Okay,
So moving on to victim-defined advocacy. And I'm just trying to. Okay. So victim-defined advocacy. I just wanted to share that when I first heard of victim-defined advocacy, I wasn't really sure what this was. I knew what a victim was, I knew what advocacy is, but I didn't understand what is victim-defined advocacy. And then having to do this, and before, this is not the first time we're talking about safety planning, but coming into the discussion, researching what safety planning, safe plans and safety planning is, gave me a whole broad understanding, a whole bigger perspective of what victim-defined advocacy is. And it's basically, it's not that, because I was thinking, oh my gosh, it must be this whole nother concept that you can't understand. And doing the research on safety planning, reading up on safe plans and safety planning, I came to understand that victim-defined advocacy, it's really nothing. I mean, it's nothing complicated. It's such it's really, I guess I'm finding it hard to put it in words, because I don't want to give it away before we discuss what it is. So victim-defined advocacy is having the knowledge how to best support victims of crime. They will have received, these are the advocates, of course, would have received training regarding advocacy on how to support victims of violence. And victim-defined advocacy begins with an understanding of the needs, resources, perspectives, and culture of each and every victim, reminding ourselves that this victim may be coming to us after the 20th time of violence, but treating it as if it was the first time they were just coming around. Victim advocates will offer emotional support, victims' rights information, frequently accompany victims and their families through the system or the criminal justice proceedings. Advocates will work with other organizations like the criminal justice or social service agencies to refer and provide help or information for all these victims, all these different victims that they serve. Victim-defined advocacy is also a straightforward and comprehensive framework. In practice, it requires a wide range of skills, knowledge, and judgment. That level of information is beyond the scope of a lot of the things that we're reading about and other stuff. But I don't mean to say at the beginning that victim-defined advocacy is oh, anyone can do that. You know, it's this easy practice, or because not everyone. We all say that we're all advocates, but depending on whether we're advocating for our victims the right way, right? And that's just like with the safety planning. We want to make sure that when we're working together with the victims, when they're doing to create a safety plan, we want to make sure that they take ownership of this plan, like Jennifer was saying earlier, and not do it all by ourselves as advocates, right? And not listen to what the victim has to share, because when it says victim-defined advocacy, it's all about the victim.
Yes.
It's all about the victim. You know.
Yes.
This is the that's why I was saying earlier, like the victim is kind of like the mastermind, that everything comes, how you work on that plan depends on what information you're getting out from the victim.
Yeah, it's really important. I think this was one of the things that I learned earlier on, and when I started this working with domestic and sexual violence a few years ago. And usually you go into it with the sense of, well, they should do this, they should do that. And it was very interesting when I sat with a couple of other very well-versed coalition workers on sexual assault and domestic violence. And an individual in our group was talking about a case of sexual assault, and within their family unit, couple of members wanted to just not even discuss it, just handle it within the own family. Another family member wanted to make sure that the person was persecuted. They arrested the abuser or the assailant, and that they also made sure that they took it all the way through court so that this person would serve time. And it was really interesting in that discussion, one of the advocates said, well, did anybody ask the victim what justice looked like for them?
Mm. Yeah.
And that's when the light bulb went on. Because, here we are, particularly in our Samoan family, and we'll talk about cultural preferences as well, is that we tend to believe we know the answer, but definitely asking the victim. And then if you're not confident in the victim's ability to make a judgment, then providing them the information that they need or the support that they need to be able to come away with making that decision for themselves.
I was thinking about that story you're sharing. You were sharing about and that's very common here, and I think in across the board, it's very common where the victims are, especially when the victims are underage, or
yes,
and even for young adults, and when parents or those that they trust and depend on for support, when they get involved, it seems like the justice is for them and not so much for the victim. But it's very important that the victim is included in all of this. I remember one of the doctors that used to come from Hawaii and speak at the Alliance when we at one of our talking tables, and he would always say that in working with a victim, the victim should, as an advocate or as a doctor, you shouldn't be doing more than the victim. You shouldn't be taking over more of the work. And this is one example, for victim defined advocacy, and for working with a victim on safety planning. I believe it will be made easier when you're getting that information from the victim. You let the victim work with you, and I totally understand that. How we were saying earlier that some victims find it hard to verbalize, but just like you were saying just now, you also want to make sure that you have those other options where you're able to work with the victim.
Particularly in our community when we're not accustomed to asking people what they need. Our culture is very, very much more,
yes,
they give you direction.
Mhm.
You're told, if you're going to do this, then you have to do it this way. I want you to do it. I want you to go to school. I want you to do better. I want, we're always guided by our loved ones, our family members, on how to live our life. And in moments when trauma happens, these same individuals who love you to death also have an input on how you should react or respond, and sometimes that's not always in the best interest of the individual. It may be in the best interest of the collective group, our family, but that's something that as advocates you need to unpack. That you need to make sure that your mindset changes. It shifts to the point of what would be in the best interest of this person, and can that person then define, how do I get my victim to safety and ensuring that they are responsible for that safety plan? Because if they don't own it, they're not going to do it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. All right. Just trying to make sure that we're moving here on time. Okay. Okay, so moving on to the next one. This is slide number 9. And Jennifer's going to share with us. Jennifer's going to explain with us, share with us on defining safety plan, on a safety plan.
So definitely we recognize that safety plans, it's based on methods or strategies for victims of domestic violence to remain safe while in a relationship, or if they're planning to leave a relationship, or even after they've left the relationship. So for advocates who help victims to develop personalized safety plans, it's important to strengthen our toolbox, what we talked about. These are those tools that you use to help victims, or you use to help strengthen victims. And so by learning how victims can cope with their emotions, how victims can share with friends and families about the abuse, and advocates can share these steps to be taken and to be done. Particularly also with legal action, because that's another part that advocacy does. It's taking them through the court proceeding, taking them through the healthcare proceeding, taking them through the police proceeding. That is a lot of the things that advocates do. Advocates must recognize that an efficient safety plan for victims will have specific, tailored to distinctive situation, tailored responsive to situations that are distinctive for victims, particularly in times of trauma, which we'll discuss more in later slides. It's important for advocates of those helping victims of domestic violence to recognize that safety plans are for dealing with emergency, and we've talked about this, like when your victim tells you they are threatened with physical assault, or when an assault has happened, or when your victim continues to live with your partner, or what to do when they've ended a relationship, which is just repeating what was stated initially. So that's defining a safety plan.
So this is defining a safety plan. So there's a question here, and it says when to use a safety plan, right? And like Jennifer was saying, dealing with emergencies. And I think of, and I'm thinking of our wellness, the REP plan, how we, how we create that plan, when to use the plan, So yeah, I just wanted to include that. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay. There you go. All right, so we've come to our workshop question number 2. Why is it important? Why is safety planning, or why are our safety plans important? Right? Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
I have one.
So this is where you can please type in your answers or your sharings into our chat box, and like we did with the last one, Jennifer's going to be able to share with us some of those answers. So why is safety planning, or why is a safety plan important?
It says here, the first one, it says because it gives victims a plan.
Give victims a plan. Okay.
Which is really important. Particularly in high stress situations when you're not sure what to do. And at least with the plan, if you've written it out and you have ownership, then you're automatically, it triggers, okay, this is what I said I was going to do. I have a safe word. I know where my cash is that I will have so that I can leave without worry of being financially strapped. I have minutes on my phone. I know where my phone is. So I have a couple of other ones here. So one says, because victims can't control their abusers.
It's really good.
Yeah, that's why it's important, because they can't. And then another one, I actually have 2 more. So safety plans should also include important documents, birth certificates, shot records, etc. Yes.
Yep.
Definitely. And when we get to the resource area, we'll definitely show that.
Yeah.
But they should.
Yeah. You said you had another one, 2 more? No?
Oh,
is that the last one?
They need a plan or guide that helps them be safe.
That backup plan.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your sharing that information. Obviously, you all know why it's important to have to do safety planning, or to have a safety plan. Please continue to share with us, even if as we move forward. Please continue to share with us some of those answers to some of these questions. If if something comes up again, by all means. Let's see. So yeah, for advocates and victims, in moments of panic, our brain can change details due to trauma. Creating a safety plan offers protection during these stressful moments. We all know that during when an individual is traumatized, or during that incident of when the violence or the abuse is actually happening, we go through the what is it, the freeze, flight,
fight or flight
mode. And then like, even if you have the safety plan, when you go through that, when you're in that fight or flight mode, it's like you forget everything. It's and I'm sure this has probably happened to many of us. And so having this down, having things prepared, and like I was saying, like I said earlier, talking about a wellness plan, how that, and I know some of you that are listening out there, you know what a wellness plan is, how it's important that when you're writing all of that down, this is what I look like when I'm going down, like when it's happening to me, like I'm being traumatized. So this is what I'm going to look like. You write all of that down, and then this is what I need for me. This is what I need to be done to myself by who, that's why in the past, previously, earlier, someone had mentioned names and numbers. We have to include names of people we can trust, people that need to know what's going on, so it's really important that we have these safety plans down. You look like you wanted to share something else. No, Jennifer?
I think definitely one of the comments that they made, having the documents, the important documents, the birth certificates, we have a lot of individuals here in American Samoa that are not local, they're not local residents, and they
Yeah.
have immigration issues, or so when you're in that moment where it's abusive, you definitely will not remember, hey, I need to get these important birth certificates, my immigration, my spot, all these things, my banking information, because you're just wanting to either leave or try to de-escalate or whatever it is that you need to be safe, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you have the plan and you know where these documents are and you put them in a safe place, so that this way, when high trauma, when stressful moments happen, then that will kick in the part, that brain change to say, okay, I have this plan already. I need to get this. I need to make sure I have money. I need, if you've planned it out, just like any other plan, if you've planned it out, when these stressful moments happen, then you can definitely go ahead and make sure to respond in a much more, probably a more positive way, have a much more successful reaction for yourself, or to get out of that situation with safety.
Yeah.
There is another one here that they mentioned. How can you create, how can a victim create a safety plan if they're being watched or controlled 24/7? Or create a plan with a friend or advocate because they'll rarely have time alone from their abusers. Well, this is that other part where you had stated earlier, nobody knows the victim situation more than they do, right? And
Yeah.
I think that if we can make sure that safety planning, the idea of it, is taught to individuals. So for those that are victims that can't get to a safe space, that don't have this is something they're going to have to be able, if they have the knowledge, then they're going to have to be able to assess that on their own, unfortunately. But I'm not sure if you're going to be in a situation where 24/7 you're not going to be able to go see an advocate. I don't know. I can't speak on that, but I would believe that if we continue to provide information and we share information with other individuals, that hopefully for those that are being watched carefully, and they'll pick this up and they'll learn to do it on their own if they can't get out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really important comment. That's a very important comment. How victims are being watched, like when they're under a microscope, they're being watched 24/7. They can't do anything, and it's really important to be able to, because most likely there's someone in the family you can that you're able to share with. So make sure that you're sharing some of that information with this person, not sharing how your safety planning, but sharing the situation that you're going through, like you're abused, that by your partner or whoever it is. Some of that information should be shared, because it's very important that you share some of that information. The other thing also is what Jennifer was talking about, when some of that stuff, the important documents that you need to prepare, that can also include medication, have a charged cell phone. It's almost like a go-to, your that go-to bag that you need everything. Just make sure that all the necessities are in there. An extra phone that's already been charged, some cash, just to get you from, as far as you can go, or just to get you from A to B when you're leaving, because time is of the essence. And remember, that is a very, very dangerous time when people are leaving those abusive situations, when you're leaving your partner. Or that's we all know, we that are doing this work, that are out there working with our community about trying to outreach and make awareness about violence, and advocates working with victims. We all know that time is of the essence, and time is very important. And when a victim leaves an abusive situation, that's the most important time. I mean, that is the most dangerous time of their lives. I mean, and that's why some stay, because when they're staying, to them, that's they're safe, you know. And like I said, nobody knows the situation better than a victim. Okay. Just trying to make sure we're on the right, that I didn't skip a slide here. Okay. So cultural awareness. This is very important. Cultural awareness approach to advocacy in American Samoa. And what slide is this?
It's 11.
It's 11. Okay, so this is my slide. Okay. All right. So you can see from the picture, those are, I know the picture isn't really clear, but those are Samoan entertainers. You can tell by what they're wearing, and especially the taupo on the left side of the picture with the big headpiece. So cultural awareness is the understanding that culture impacts. What kind of impact does our culture, okay, so we're speaking as Samoans, as our Samoan culture, what kind of impact does it have on an individual's perspective and their experience of being victims or being of victimization? And it's also the cultural relevance, cultural relevance also puts cultural knowledge and skill into action, and making an individual victim service program relevant to the victims that it serves. So it's also important that we recognize the lens in which our victims here locally in American Samoa, how they view domestic violence, how we recognize what is DV or what is domestic violence here in American Samoa. When we have cultural awareness, we can understand how culture impacts an individual's perspective and their experience of victimization. For advocates who work within the within our local community, within the Samoan community, when they have cultural relevance, it places cultural knowledge and skill into action, making an individual victim service program relevant to the victim it serves. Okay, I know I said that earlier. Now, let's begin to unpack these statements in our following slides. Recognizing and respecting individual cultural differences are important to sensitive and effective work with our victims. In addition, differences in concepts of suffering and healing can influence how a victim may experience the effects of victimization and the process of recovery. Very important, recovery. So this is also kind of like the victim-defined advocacy. Victim-defined advocacy is defining your advocacy for a certain victim. The cultural awareness approach to advocacy in American Samoa is kind of like the same. What kind of impact does our culture, you know, it's advocacy with keeping in mind that we have to be aware of the different cultural aspects here that we have within our community. Was there anything you wanted to add on, Jennifer? Sorry.
No, I think you've covered it well.
Okay. All right. So let's move on.
Thank you. I think this is my slide.
Okay. All right.
So defining an effective response to domestic violence, sexual assault in American Samoa. That was, over the last few years, it's been important for the Alliance to have listening sessions within the community. And the goal of these listening sessions was to get information and recommendations from participants about culturally appropriate practices to support healthy relationships here to create violent-free communities. And from 2017 to 2018, the Alliance team, which includes Judy Matautia, our program specialist, and service providers within our community, and it was to ask them to share their experiences on service provision to victims, as well as the knowledge of service providers about existing services. So knowing what DPS does, knowing what DHSS does. So if I'm an employee at DOH, what is my knowledge of what services are being provided by the other service providers at Department of Public Services, at LBJ Tropical Medical Center, at the social services. So that was our defining an effective response to domestic violence. And in it, let's see, so the aim was to tap into daily work experiences with those who have knowledge about DVSA, and that's domestic violence and sexual assault, so that we could document a perceived and actual needs for service providers as well as victims. The aim to interview victims was to identify how closely their actual experience aligned with what service providers and community leaders perceive to what's happening when responding to domestic violence and sexual assault. So these listening sessions included a series of questions asking victims to share their experience from healthcare providers, police officers, victim advocates, and in the next slide, we'll review the findings. And this document can be found on our website at asalliance.co. And it's really important because we had not found anything in our community that we could look at so that we could then start to develop these types of education awareness within our community about what our victims are saying about the domestic violence responses to them when they're calling in and what is happening. Yeah. And then what our first responders are saying about it. So this is a huge document for us, for the Alliance, and I'm just really proud about that and happy to say that Judy was a big part of that.
Yeah, so this this was actually done in 2017, 2018. I know the manuscript came out in 2018, but it was very interesting. It was, I just wanted to share that as we moved into doing this, the work, interviewing a lot of the different areas of the community, the leaders, the victims, the service providers. It was very interesting how the information they had to share. And for me, it was, I came to realize that, and I know the work of the Alliance is about making awareness, getting that information out there on violence and everything. But I came to realize that a lot of our people out there have different views and different perspectives of what violence is. You know, any kind of violence, as we believe, is uncalled for or is should be against the law. And I know with physical, a lot of that stuff when it's physical, and that's breaking the law, that's against the law. When there's assault, there's also a lot of other violence like financial violence, economical violence, emotional violence, a lot of that other stuff that is very, that's very prevalent and heavy stuff, as well as it does major damage to one. You know, it brings suppression to one. But, you know, a lot of our, going back to interviewing a lot of our people here, and we don't see that as major issues, you know. Oh no, that's so yeah, it was a very interesting, very interesting work having to interview our people and just getting to pick off of their brains, their minds, what they had to share. I was very, it was a privilege for me doing this work, working with the community.
Well, you did a great job. So
thank you.
But yeah, and then the next slide we'll go over the findings.
Yeah, okay, so moving along. All right, so here are our findings. Okay. So with the document that we had shared, that Jennifer had shared in the previous slides, so just to kind of briefly go over some of them. 9 victims within the same document. 9 victims had shared their experience on domestic violence and sexual assault services here in American Samoa. 4 of the women did not use any of the services provided for DVSA victims. So 4 of the 9 victims didn't use any of the services. 2 women, they didn't feel they were safe in their homes during the time of the survey, or during the time that we had spoken to them or interviewed them. 2 women claimed they did not call anyone as a result of the violence. So it was like it wasn't being reported at all. So that's like one of those cases where it was unreported, therefore it never came to light. So that's and I don't want to go off track here, but that's also one of those cases. This is a good example of one of those cases where people ask, well, do you have data? How many violent cases, how many domestic violent cases were there last year in American Samoa? So these are one of those cases that it's prevalent, it's happening out there, but we don't report these cases, so therefore they never make it to that number that we're looking for. But we cannot not include them. These are stories that when they don't make it to how do they come to light? How do they come to get service? So these cases, I always say that, you know how they say, what is it? There's that saying, no child left behind, right? So these are, to me, these cases that are left behind because they never come to light. And it's very sad for me. So for advocates, it is important to recognize that the victims you may be serving will not report to the services that we provide. Okay, I know we have a lot of services, but not everyone is going to step forward and use those services, right? They're not feeling safe, and it's common. It's common that victims, after being victimized or abused, they don't feel safe. Asking the question, what does safety look like for you? That can help advocates to find safety spaces for a lot of these victims. It also provides power and control. It puts power and control back to the victims to determine what happens in times of crisis. Remember, leaving is not always like what we were discussing earlier. Leaving is one of the dangerous times within that relationship. Leaving is not always what the victim wants. They may just want their husband to stop drinking. Safety can be to find a safe place for them to be until their husbands have stopped or sobered up. And that's very common. Women that we're right there at the steps of that door where you go in and they're going to apply for that CPO or go into that to the police station to make that statement, and they back off right at the, and that's common. And we should understand, as advocates, it should be understandable that that's what victims go through. The other finding that that was very important in our document there was that respondents were asked if they were satisfied with the police when the police were involved. 3 respondents, three of them responded that the service wasn't good. They were not satisfied. Only 1 stated it was very good. Some of the respondents also stated the police knew their families, and they did not want to ask for their help because they blamed the victim for causing stress or being a problem. So that is also another common practice here amongst our families when calling DPS for assistance.
Can I just interject real quick here?
Go ahead,
I'm sorry. So one of our participants said, well, one of the reasons, and it's tied to this question, the respondents, one of the reasons victims aren't reporting is because we're a small island and everyone knows each other. So if they report, it'll get back to the abuser. So that's definitely that cultural approach, right?
Yes.
And so that's also tagged onto this one. But I just wanted to present that as well before you provided what advocates can do.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So for advocates working within our community, when counseling victims who would most likely not call police officers, asking what would make things worse in this situation, it's important to remember the goal of advocacy is to identify a space where the victim is free from violence and control of their partner, just to meet their basic human needs. Some victims may state, I wish that he wouldn't hang out with his friends so much because he spends all of our monies and there's nothing for my kids and I. Making things worse can be identifying for the victim. So when is the best time to have these discussions with their husbands? When they are drunk? No. Waiting until they are sober, and then having someone like a reverend parent or somebody or a family member that is respected by your husband to discuss solutions. So this means providing communication tools for the victim, creating safety, because sometimes the victim doesn't think of those, like, they can actually sit down afterwards and talk. So yeah, and so when asked if they were, and this is also more findings from this document, when asked if they went to court, 2 respondents followed through court filings. Of the 9 first experiences, only one abuser was arrested. And when asked why the police were not involved, one victim stated she was too shocked and didn't think it was warranted. Another said she was too scared of the perpetrator and she didn't want to bring shame on her family, which is very also common. So for advocates, asking the victim, what does safety look like for you? It may mean getting escorted to another family member until the situation has de-escalated. Creating a plan for a victim after a situation. You can talk about safety during an explosive incident. You can say the next time this happens, you can encourage the victim. Stay in a room with a phone, call 911, a friend if possible, or just have a packed bag ready, keep it hidden in a safe space. And some examples, like we were talking about earlier, those documents, important documents, needed medication if you're on medication, some extra clothes, cash, and a charge phone. And I know when kids are involved, it tends to be a little more difficult, because you're also having to prep extra for the children as well. Sorry. So when asked why they didn't take their cases to court, and we're still talking about the findings here, the overwhelming response pointed towards self-preservation. I didn't want to start a fuss or talk about it. That was pretty much the common answer. It was easier to ignore. I got kicked out of the shelter, so I had to make up with my husband and had to cancel court. I didn't want to see this guy that did this to me and add on to that. It was for my own safety. Those are like some of the answers that that we were able to get from some of these victims throughout our findings. And then advocates working with who do not want to make a fuss. The focus can be how to create a safety plan when leaving, making sure they have a safety space to stay, that they can be protected, find someone they trust where they can leave money, extra keys, that go-to bag, clothing, so that they can leave quickly if necessary. You can even encourage them to open up a savings plan to increase their independence. These little things that you can point out to the victim as an advocate. So these are some of the findings that we wanted to share today in today's webinar about going out there and getting this information from our community. In case someone is wondering, well, this is information you guys get. No, this is local information, and I can vouch for it because I was one of those people that was facing some of these people, or talking to some of these people and got some of these answers from. So yeah. Was there anything you want to add on to this, Deborah?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know, I'm not sure if you covered this. I may have not heard this, but, responding back to the person that said one of the reasons they aren't reported is because we're a small island and everyone knows each other. And I know that we talked about the experience with the police, that was not good.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to also reiterate once again that if they're not wanting to report because it's a small island, so then this obviously safety then is defined differently. Safety then might be, well, I want people to believe me. I want my family members. I want, you know, if they're not comfortable sharing it with, that it might get back to the abuser, then really identifying with them. Okay, so what would safety look like? Is it that you just want somebody to believe you? Well, I believe you. I believe your story. I believe what you're saying, and whatever we need to do so that you can feel safe in that, or that you can build resilience and wellness on that. The other thing is maybe you just want your family members to believe you, that this is happening within your household or within your, then definitely making sure that they then, how do you communicate it in a safe way so that this way you can get that support from your family unit. It's a difficult one to, you know, there's not just one answer for everything. Judy, your PowerPoint is on. And so your screen's changed. So yeah, it's really different to, you really have to go back to really, if they're not comfortable reporting and there's a reason that's being held back on reporting, then you really need to unpack what is it why are you holding back? What is it that you're afraid of? And how do we get you to safety so that you're feeling safe about it? And really what does safety look like? Because it can be a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily mean going to the police station and reporting it. Maybe that's not what you want. We normally would say yes, that you would want to get, like I said in that earlier discussion of the friend and the, you know, when I first heard that question, where one member of the family wanted to go to the police, the other one just wanted to just not let anybody know about it. You know, you have to come back to that victim and then define what is it that you want, not based on what I feel you need, but what is it you want, and really helping them to figure that out.
Yeah. Okay. So am I back to showing my
yes, you're
I'm good?
You're on the right. It's good.
Okay. Sorry about that.
So we can go on to the next slide if you want.
Yes. Okay. So workshop questions. These are our last questions. Some of going into more questions. So again, feel free to type in your comments and answers and your sharings into our chat box, and Jennifer will be able to read them out. So some of the first question: how does the Fa'asamoa impact safety planning? How does our Fa'asamoa impact safety planning? So let's work on that one first before we go to the next question. So feel free to send in your comments, your answers, your sharings. How does the Fa'asamoa impact safety planning?
I have one here, Judy.
Okay, let's hear
it. It says, because the Fa'asamoa focuses on the wellness of the community, and not so much on the individual. So I guess going back to that whole thing of not always wanting it to be reported because you don't want to embarrass the family.
Yes.
You know, there's that there's that. So I guess that's where that would go through.
That's a good comment. That's how they're talking about how our Fa'asamoa focuses more on us as a whole, like a village, the extended family, and not the individual person. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that.
There's also, and this is a long discussion, it's the notion of the Faiava.
Okay.
I didn't mean to laugh. But yeah, we do culturally have that idea where we have our in-laws living with us, and they are treated differently to some extent in some families, and that does then lead to abuse.
Thank you for mentioning that. That is one of our family settings where there is a lot of violence. I mean, just even the just even the mention of the name Fayava. Fayava is you mentioned the word Fayava in a lot of our settings, and one, either people start to laugh, or two, it's considered no. And I'm not saying because you were laughing earlier, but no, I think you were laughing. You were kind of like smiling earlier because you didn't think someone was going to mention that. That comes
Ah,
because I didn't think anyone was gonna. And then you said it was a big one. Um, but yes, it's almost like the name, the word, the term Fayava has a negative connotation in the Samoan language, or in our Samoan in the Samoan setting. And when I was asked, I started asking questions about that, and they say anyone who is called a Fayava, and in some families they don't like people being called Fayava. They don't like the in-laws being called the Fayava or the Nofugange, the Nofutane, which is what they refer to the women, and the Fayava is to the men. The men that marry into the family, or the women that marry into the family. So the in-laws are called Fayava for the men and Nufutane for the women. So some families, in reality, they don't allow their in-laws to be called that in the family because the word has a negative connotation in our Samoan setting. And the reason being is because these are the people in our Samoan culture. And I would like to say, this is what I would like to say, the Samoan culture of my parents, and maybe some of my Samoan culture today. And when I say the Samoan culture of my parents, I'm talking about like, say the Samoan culture of about like 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, when my parents were born and raised. So I'm talking about 60, 70 years ago. So I would like to say that the Samoan culture of my parents, and maybe even some of my Samoan culture when I was born about 50 years ago, um, um, it does apply that when there's a Fayava, when you're a Fayava, you come to this family and you're considered a slave. It's like you're treated as a slave. You hardly get to rest. It's like you do all the heavy lifting within that family. You do all the heavy chores within that family, and that's oppression. I mean, Samoans have made a movie out of that, and where the mother-in-law totally abused her son-in-law to the point where he went back to his parents. And when he went back to his parents asked, "Why have you come back?" And he told him what had happened. And his father turned around and said, "That was nothing. You came back because of that? That is peanuts." This is what the father-in-law, the father said to his son. So it's like when you're considered a Fayava, it's almost like suck it up and bite the bullet and 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 do what you're supposed to do as a Fayava. And so that too has a really big impact on our men as well as our women who are
yeah.
Nofutanes. When it comes to safety planning, how are they supposed to safety plan when they're like they're made to sleep in a separate house, or they're made to eat whatever's left of from the rest of the family. So yes, it does apply to that too as well. Thank you for who shared that. Can I ask? Can I ask?
I
Oh
don't
no,
know.
that's okay. That's okay. We don't want to be sharing any names, but whoever shared that, thank you so much for sharing that. That does play a big role in how our victims are impacted. How many victims out there are impacted because of our culture.
Well, and I know that we're short for time, and we have two more slides. So there's one more that I also want to share, and this is actually my comment. In the Samoan setting, it's where you think about how culturally who do we go for help? As women, we're in a village setting. You're supposed to go to your mother or to the Wharetua, or the
Yes.
Matai's wife. But that doesn't always lead to advocacy.
Yes.
And that Samoa way of going where you're, particularly the one that didn't want to report because you may know your abusers and your abusers may be in your village, that is that's another process in the Samoa that makes it much more difficult for victims here in American Samoa or Samoan cultures to get assistance or even be in a U.S. setting and try to get assistance because there's still that mindset of who do I trust, right?
Yes. Okay.
But I think we can, if we want to just bypass the second question, Judy, we'll move on to get to because the other slides are just as important.
All right. So moving on to, and thank you for those that were able to reply to that question.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So moving on to the next slide. And these are the personalized safety plan. So with this, we wanted to use what you already know, like the first one there. If you're a woman who has been abused, you probably know more about safety planning and risk assessment than you might realize. So being in a relationship with an abuser, abusive and surviving requires considerable skill and resourcefulness. Anytime you do or say something as a way to protect yourself or your children, you are assessing risk and enacting a safety plan. You do it all the time. It's just not always a conscious process. So sometimes we're doing more of the safety planning, acting it out, rather than and not thinking about it, that we're actually doing it. Think it through. It can be a helpful safety strategy to evaluate risk and make safety plans in a more intentional way. Whether you're currently with your partner or have ended the relationship, and whether you choose to use available services or to get the police involved, there are certain things that are helpful to consider in planning for your future safety. So safety strategies are important, and it's important to think them through. Did you want to go over some of these other ones, Jennifer?
Sure. So for the next one, we want to make sure that you're aware of the dangers. If you're planning on leaving, if you're planning to leave your partner or already have left, be aware that abusers or batterers, they often escalate their violence during times of separation. Just like Judy said earlier, that sometimes leaving is the hardest part or the most riskiest part, right? Mm-hmm. It increases your risk for harm, including serious and life-threatening injuries. So making a separation safety plan can help reduce the risks to you and your children. And then you want to make sure that you evaluate your options. Only you can judge what's safe, and to tell your situation to advocates, so that this way, or encouraging victims to make sure that they share what's happening to them. Sometimes people don't have good information, and so they might not have good information about domestic violence, and so they may offer the wrong information to help women who are abused. Yeah. And so we want to make sure that advocates can be very helpful and resourceful. And so encouraging victims to disclose what's happening can help them to assess what's the next step. And then the last one, thinking ahead. Planning ahead, you don't have to wait for an emergency to ask for help for victims. In fact, it's a good idea to always talk to people who can help before there's a crisis. So encouraging victims, as an advocate, if you know somebody that's a victim or you're working with somebody that's a victim who may not want to share information, really encouraging them that when you talk to people, this can help, particularly when you're going through crisis. When somebody knows what's happening in your situation, they may pick up your phone and your call much more readily because they know, oh my gosh, this person might be in a 911 situation. And find out what they're willing to do for you, right?
Yeah.
So that way you'll know in advance if you have a place to stay, a source of financial assistance, or a safe person to keep copies of important papers.
Yeah. All right, so those are some of the personalized safety plan um, for you to think about when creating that, when personalizing that plan.
Mhm.
Okay, so we wanted to share this. I know we've got like 5 more minutes, and we wanted to quickly share this. This is some of the safety plan forms that one can fill out. You want to share some more on this one, Jennifer?
Well, I think that this one comes from the Arizona Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence, and we put the link on the next slide. But they have a very thorough safety plan, and these are. I just wanted to give a sense of what questions are asked or what situations are provided in the safety plan, because there again, the best part about this is it's a click and check. You can check
Yeah.
off what happened. You don't have to verbalize it. You don't have, it can bring trauma to you or trigger trauma, but definitely somebody's already verbalized it for you. If you don't have the tool sets, or your victim doesn't have the tool sets. So for advocates, having this written out is really a good way to work with your victims.
Yeah, and all you need to do is just tick what applies to you, what you know can work with you for your situation. And remember, everyone has a different situation as victim.
And
As victim.
yeah, and definitely for advocates, it's really important when you see the length and the different scenarios that are listed on here. It's really important that you prepare to spend some time with these victims, giving them a sense of security that you're there with them to help them process, and they may not get it done within that hour or 2 hours that you're with them or in that time frame, but making sure that you stay connected with them to help them move this along.
Yeah. So we'll provide links, resources for you before we end today's discussion on how to for you to be able to connect with some of these forms on creating, making it easier to create a safety plan or for safety planning. Okay, so these are some of the resources available. We just threw up here some easy for you to look at. The personalized safety plan that we were just, and Jennifer had mentioned, the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual Violence. And the form there, the personalized safety plan form, you can go onto this link and look up some more. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, creating a safety plan. There's a link there, the safety plan for victims of domestic violence. You also have that link there, and partner abuse. Developing a safety plan, this is from New Zealand. That's also the link there for you. And there's many more. While you are looking up these resources, there will be many other similar resources on safety planning that you can find when you're looking these up as well. So, did you want to add on, Jennifer?
Yeah, just one more thing before the time's up. I definitely would encourage advocates that when they're engaged with community service providers like Department of Human Social Services, LBJ, DOH, any, asking them, hey, do you have an access to a safety plan? We may have one here in American Samoa that is readily accessible, and advocates, and we'll also look for that too. But I think it's a good thing for advocates to ask service providers if they already have this tool, because mostly if they do, then it may already be translated.
Yeah. All right. So, and if you're in need of any more other resources, you can connect with us at our office, 684-699-0272, or you can go to our website and find more information on there. Okay, and so we've come to the end of our webinar. Our time is up, our 90 minutes. We right on the clock. With that, we want to make sure that we don't keep you any longer than 90 minutes. So we want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Executive Director Jennifer Tafiono of the Alliance, for being able to co-host with me today. Other than that, thank you so much, everyone. Again, thank you for taking time out to join us today. And we hope that the information provided today can be of use. And we hope that providing this information is enabling all of us, we're all advocates, to be able to support those family members, friends, and those who are victims of violence out there. So Faftai Telelava, thank you, and be sure to stay dry in our local weather if you're listening from off island, and happy holidays, everyone. Thank you. Soifua.